I'm John Duval. Welcome to the Scriptural Way Bible Study. The Scriptural Way Bible Study is brought to you by the Seminole Point Church of Christ, located at 16300 North May Avenue, Oklahoma City. On behalf of the elders and members of the Seminole Point Church of Christ, I would like to thank you for your interest in spiritual matters. Now, let's take our Bibles and seek the Scriptural Way. Good evening. I'm John Duvall.
I'm Dale Decker.
I'm John Hall.
This is the Scriptural Way Bible Study. We'd like to thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful afternoon, this wonderful evening. For us it is evening, for you it may be during the middle of the morning. And we want you to know that it is our pleasure to have you to join us for this Bible study. We've been training Jimmy Kersey to fill in for Travis, so he's on the controls tonight, and we decided to give Travis a night off, as if one night off last week wasn't enough, but we decided to give him a night off. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about last week. We did have some pretty major storms blow through the Oklahoma City area. And earlier in the day, we just did not know what was coming other than just some bad storms, possibility of tornadoes and everything. And they hit a little bit earlier. Thankfully, they didn't hit us in the northern Oklahoma City, Edmond area. However, though, they did, the path, it was heading towards Edmond, but the path changed and it went towards Piedmont and Guthrie. And so none of our members suffered any loss as a result of it, though one of our members, the family lives up in Guthrie, and so they had to go several days without power as a result of the damage that was done up there. So, but anyway, we are all present and accounted for and doing well.
Yeah,
And,
actually the members that you're talking about live next to Cashin, and Cashin was basically destroyed.
That's right. I forgot about that. And so they're very, very, they're thankful, very thankful that they survived that. And I want to give you an update on Lansing. Lansing, as we mentioned 2 weeks ago, we asked you to keep him in your prayers, and he's doing better. They have taken the IV out, and
No, they haven't taken the IV out yet.
They took something out, he told me.
They took the BiPAP machine out away from him today.
They took the mask away from him, so he doesn't have to use it
Yeah, that's the
anymore.
BiPAP
Okay.
machine. And they're going to take the catheter out tomorrow, but he's still on the IV because they're giving him antibiotic and they're giving him sodium chloride. But the way he's progressing and everything, it wouldn't surprise me that within the next couple of days they will remove the IVs as well. He is doing very, very well, and he certainly appreciates all the thoughts and prayers of everybody.
That's right, exactly. Very, very appreciative for that. Okay. Well, John, we left off 2 weeks ago. We had just began a study looking at the question of life, how did it begin? And what I'd like to do tonight is we're going to read the first day. We've already talked about it, but we'll read through it beginning with Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 there. And John, if you would read for us beginning in Genesis 1, verse 1, and let's read down through verse 5. And if you would, we will have that up on the screen for you to follow along there. Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 5.
Okay. Starting in verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day.
Okay, we spent time last week, or 2 weeks ago in a previous broadcast, looking at the various elements that came into existence on that day, the things that God had created, all being summed up there into the first day. But what we'll do now, Dale, is we're going to start with day number 2. And if you would, let's start reading there in Genesis 1 and read for us verses 6 through 8, and we'll look at that in detail now.
All right, he says, "Then God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Thus God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day."
All right, let's talk about this firmament that God created there. Especially as you consider the way that it reads here. You had the waters that were above the firmament and the waters that were below the firmament. And essentially, I like to say that what God created when He created the firmament was the living space for man. For it was the space where man and all animal and all beings upon the earth would live, where they would exist. And Dale, it's a perfect living space, isn't it?
Well, exactly right. I mean, when you look at verse 8, and it says that God called the firmament heaven, this is not referring to the heaven that we're all looking forward to that day when the judgment comes again. This is talking about the heaven where we have the clouds. And this is where the water vapor is located in those clouds. And of course, we get rain from those clouds periodically as well. Rain is used to refresh the earth. If you think about it, those of us who have experimented or enjoyed growing what we might call a terrarium, we get these big 5-gallon water bottles, and we put a little dirt in there, and we put some plants in there, and we seal the end of the water bottle. And you have that perfect living space. You never have to do anything because water continues to work there. The plants obviously produce oxygen. They use carbon dioxide to grow. They expend or expel oxygen, and that's why we have a lot of vegetation here on the face of the earth. Like you say, it's a perfect living environment because man is going to reap the benefits of the plants from the oxygen.
That's right.
But animals are going to excrete carbon dioxide, which the plants reap the benefit of that. It's a perfect living environment, and man cannot destroy this earth, no matter how much we try. We can make it look ugly, but we're not going to destroy this perfect living space. Because
God has created that. It self-generates.
Exactly right.
Yeah. John, as a matter of fact, there are some interesting statistics that I pulled from an article called Atmosphere of the Earth from Wikipedia. And it kind of gives us the breakdown. And I remember as a kid, you always think, well, we breathe oxygen. But it's amazing the various primary elements and then trace elements that exist within the very air that we breathe.
Yeah, basically starting off here, dry air mainly consists of nitrogen, 78% about approximately.
It's interesting that we all don't talk with that funny, no, that's helium that gives you the funny voice.
That's right.
Yeah, there's only a small amount of helium out there in the air. 20% or about of oxygen, and then about 1% of argon, and less than 1/10% of carbon dioxide. And then small amounts of other gases like helium and other things.
It's amazing that the gas that contains the most by volume is nitrogen. But it's the oxygen that we live off of, essentially. And the carbon dioxide, which is so minute by comparison, is so crucial to the animal life. Or the plant life, not animal life there. And like Dale pointed out a while ago, you know, whenever we exhale, that's just not used up air. That's actually something that the plants can live off of. If there was no carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the plants would not survive. If the oxygen was much lighter, we would have a difficult time. If there was some other, you think about people who travel to higher altitudes where the oxygen is thinner, they have a little bit, they have a harder time. So we see a perfection here in this environment that we live in.
Well, in fact, there's a reason why the majority of the air is nitrogen.
Why is that?
Well, think about it. What do you do 4 or 5 times a year to your yard? You put fertilizer on it, right?
I water it.
And it's what? You do
I water it about 4 or 5 times a year.
Well, that's why yours is brown. But you put fertilizer on it.
Right.
And fertilizer is high nitrogen content. In fact, the first number on fertilizer is nitrogen.
Right.
Usually you're putting something like 28 to 30 of nitrogen. When it rains, this nitrogen in the air is brought down to the earth.
That's right.
And after a rain, if you watch grass, it will grow very quickly. Not just because of the water, but because the nitrogen is there. This is God's way of ensuring that there is plenty of vegetation out there for the animals. There's plenty of oxygen for mankind and the animals. Not only will it grow faster, but it will even get greener after a nice rain.
You know, that's an interesting point. It shows the use for nitrogen itself, not simply carbon dioxide
Exactly
being
right.
the positive thing there.
I mean, there's a reason that all of these elements are in the air.
Well, and even the oxygen gets into the water through a process of dissolving. Every time that the waves splash or something falls into the water, there's something like that, it's bringing oxygen into that water. Yeah.
And if you think about that now, those people who love to have aquariums in their house, if you don't have a pump in there, an aerator to continue to create oxygen in that water, the fish will die.
That's right.
Same thing in our oceans here. God has made a perfect environment here with the waves that are constantly working there with the oceans and everything. It creates oxygen in that water, and the fish can continue to survive from it.
That's right. That's exactly right. John?
Well, Luke mentions the cycle that Dale was talking about there. It's actually got a name called the nitrogen cycle.
Yes.
And then he also mentions here, if the atmosphere was 100% oxygen, light a match and we all go up in flames.
That's very true. That's why when you have someone in the hospital and they're on high doses of oxygen, which is not 100%, but they do have higher doses of oxygen, the hospitals will specifically, years ago when they allowed smoking around there, would specifically say you cannot smoke around this person.
Yeah, that's right. We got a chart I want to bring up here that kind of illustrates the vastness of the atmosphere. Most of the time whenever I think of the atmosphere, I think about, an airplane really high. But really the area where the airplanes fly is nothing by comparison to the full height of the atmosphere. And I left my notes on that. I don't have them right with me, but Jimmy, if you would go ahead and fade over to that chart there. And I don't know how well it'll look on the screen there because it's kind of a lot of information there to it. But the very lowest portion of that, illustrated kind of by the height of a mountain there, is an area that we live in. And you'll probably, if you can make it out, there's a symbol of an airplane flying. And that kind of gives you the altitude that the airplanes fly in. And then you go on up and you have something so high, it's called the mesosphere. And there are some that are higher, so high the weather balloons can't even study it. And you go up even higher, there's weird lightning storms called sprites, I think, on the chart there. And it continues to go on up until you're finally at the outer edges of our atmosphere. What's this, 50, 60 miles?
60 miles.
Yeah, 60 miles. And so, just when you look up to see an airplane, that airplane's not high by comparison to what's really up there. And all of this is for us to live in. It is man's sandbox, if you would, where we live and exist. So, and all this God made on day 2, which is a lot.
So we live in a terrarium.
Well, exactly. And I've wondered about that. We're going to stray here for just a moment, and then we're going to, after this one little thought, we're going to take our first break, and then we'll go on to the third day. But, of course, I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but taking the Bible literally for what it says, I kind of picture it being a terrarium environment. Have a layer of water above the atmosphere, waters from below the waters above. And I could envision the world prior to the flood being kind of like a terrarium environment. It's kind of very moist, very humid, the dew coming up from the ground and watering everything. So completely different, I would suspect. But that's just my thoughts there with that. All right, let's go ahead and take our first break. And on the other side of the break, we're going to step into, we need to talk about the ending of day 2 real briefly. And that's the evening and the morning. Just as with the first day, signified the end of that second day. And so it's very important, the consistency that we see there with that. So.
Yeah, we will always start the day in morning. Morning and evening is the first day. But it's ironic or interesting that God always said the evening and the morning were the first day. The evening and the morning was the second day.
Yeah. It is an interesting point that we have that recorded as that. Yeah. John, any thoughts before we take our break?
Luke just had a question here, or comment question. How would you define the word firmament? The root Hebrew word literally means to beat out.
Good question. We should have about 30 seconds to generate an answer for that. Let's go ahead and take our first break. And actually, that's a very good question. We'll see if we can catch something there for that. And so stay tuned. We will be right back.
Hello, I'm Ron Witt, one of the elders of the Seminole Point Church of Christ. On behalf of the elders and members of the Seminole Point Church of Christ, I would like to invite you to be our guest at any of our worship services and Bible classes. The meeting place of the Seminole Point Church of Christ is located at 16300 North May Avenue, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, zip code 73013. The Seminole Point Church of Christ meets Sunday mornings at 9:30 for Bible classes, 10:30 for worship service, and 5 p.m. for our afternoon worship service. We also have Bible classes on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. In addition to our regularly scheduled Bible classes and worship services, we also have a Bible class on Tuesday morning at 10, this live netcast at 7:30 p.m., and a ladies' Bible class which meets once a month. Whether you live in Oklahoma City area or you are traveling through Oklahoma City, we would love to have you come and be our guest. We have Bible classes for all ages. Now, let us return to our study.
Welcome back to our study. We have a few things there. Actually, Luke has just thrown something into the chat room. And John has got something, and I'm going to pull something up here in just a second. The question, Luke says, how would you define the word firmament? The root Hebrew word literally means to beat out. So Luke goes on to say, literally means atmosphere, a vault that held the water's atmosphere in place. This is my understanding. Now, Luke, you've just gone above our pay grade here. It's a very good explanation.
Well, the spread out, I think, helps match a little bit closer to what Webster says when it talks about the vault or arch of the sky. So to spread out the atmosphere, to create that vault or that expanse.
And that's what you see. I mean, from our standpoint, you look at it, it does kind of like an archway or a vault there. I was going to point out that. Let me get to where I'm going here with this one real quick. Well, according to, I think this is based upon Vine's expository diction, not Vine's, but Strong's definitions. They give the following definition of the word firmament, what God called a firmament, as being this: extended surface, solid or expanse firmament, and then expanse as in flat as base or support, firmament, a vault of heaven supporting waters above, which would be an interesting way of looking at that because the waters were above the firmament, and so the firmament would have been an expanse there, considered by Hebrews as solid and supporting waters above, as an archway that would support the waters above, to beat out or to spread out. Yeah. That is a very good question.
Which it still does do, support the waters above.
Well, it does.
It's just until,
exactly.
Up until a certain point, and then it becomes so saturated that it rains, but there's always water above that firmament.
Well,
and water within the firmament, for that matter.
Well, I've often wondered that if during the days of Noah, the waters that fell from above, when he talks about he opened the windows of heaven, if some of that was the water that was up there prior to the flood, when he created the firmament,
right.
If those waters above he released and they fell as well. It was just a thought. Yeah.
Well, it makes sense in just, helping to understand the flood.
Yeah.
So many people question that, well, not so many, but I'm sure there's a number of people, I've heard it before, how can you raise the waters up to the tops of the mountains just by rain? There's, they wouldn't think there'd be enough water in our normal atmosphere to do that. That would help understand that a little bit, as he initially, it covered the earth.
Right.
And then he decided to separate it, so he brought a certain amount up to the heavens to separate it, and then at some point in time, possibly at the flood, he brought it back down again.
There was a movie about a year or so ago, all working on this 2012 hype that some people are worried about. And it was an interesting movie. And to me, the best part of the movie is at the end of the movie. Everything fell apart, and the world flooded. And what did they build? They built 3 arks to put the population that was surviving into it. But to me, the writers of that movie believed that there's enough water present to flood the earth. So I thought that was pretty good point. So, okay, alrighty. So let's go ahead and look at day number 3. We've made it up to day 1 and to day 2 there, but let's look in Genesis chapter 1. We're going to read verses 9 and 10. Genesis chapter 1, verses 9 and 10, and here's what he says. Then God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Now verse 11. Then God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit that yields fruit the tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth. And it was so. And then verses 12 and 13, and the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, so the evening and the morning were the third day. Now, so here we have the firmament is firmly in place. And so below the firmament you had water. So what does God do? He calls forth the dry land. Now, the dry land is amazing. It is just as amazing as firmament, because the dry land is going to be equipped to support life. Animal life of all different types, sundry shapes and sizes, even mankind. Man would live his whole existence upon the dry land. And that's pretty amazing. And so Dale, once he had the dry land, we then find that he separated the bodies of the water with the dry land, and the waters he called the seas, and it was a beautiful, beautiful creation there.
That is exactly right. We have the seas, we have the oceans, we have lakes.
Exactly.
And we even have ponds. All of these are separated from the land and everything. You have the land, and then you have these water forces. Again, it's a perfect creation, because if you think about the jet streams and everything, to this very day, you have warm air that brings up the moisture off the seas and the oceans and everything. If you ever live close to a river, you know that close to that river, it's much more humid than it is away from that river.
Right.
Because you have the moisture evaporating and going up into the air. And then you have cold fronts come in here, and the cold fronts hit that warm air, and that's when you get the thunder and the lightning and you get the rain. And it brings it back down to earth, so that you replenish that earth. You're constantly replenishing the ground, so the ground continues to grow the vegetation and the trees and livestock, and mankind is able to survive based on this perfect terrarium.
That's right. That's exactly right. John, any thoughts?
Yeah, Luke mentioned in here, imagine the forces necessary to create and move water and earth. It is unimaginable and a miracle by all definitions, the most powerful miracle ever performed. You know, you think about water, and my backyard doesn't drain all that great sometimes, and when the water gets back there, and I sometimes have to create some ways for it to get out until I finish landscaping back there. After I get the water out, it still is wet and very soggy wet for a couple days, even after the sun's coming out. And again, you know, you see that miracle here. You see the power of that. He didn't just bring forth some land.
Right.
He brought forth dry ground.
That's a very good point.
And in one day, all of this water that covered was moved somewhere. When the water's in my backyard, the puddles, it takes a while for that stuff to move away and go somewhere else. But in one day, and probably in a matter of either minutes or hours or however he wanted
Just
to do
like
it,
that.
you know, if that's what he wanted, by, you know, in a second. But sometime in a day, he made it happen. You know, like you said, imagine how much water that is. That's an amazing amount of water.
God spoke and it was done.
Well, and you think about the land mass, and we won't get into the whole continental drift theory and so forth, but when you think about the land that was brought forth, you've got the peaks, the valleys, and you've got the low points and high points. So immediately when that land came up, there were going to be areas that retained water. We call them lakes, you know. And of course, there's a lot more to the process, and God created all of it. And Luke's exactly right with that. But I think about an illustration with a child. A child is going to play with his Legos, and he's got two pieces that he just cannot get apart. Try as he might, he can't get them apart. Here, Dad, would you help? Dad walks over, pop, a piece of cake. We look at what God did, and we're dumbfounded. How incredible and how hard that must have been. But for him, he's a creator. He spoke it, and it happened. So that's exactly right. But when you look at this, especially when you look at verse 11, not only did he bring forth the dry land, but now he puts vegetation on the dry land. And he breaks it down. You've got the grass, you've got the herbs, you've got the fruit trees. And what is interesting is in each of those cases, they were seed-bearing plants. And he gives the command that each one would reproduce after its own kind through the process of seeds. Now, I would suggest that in a very small form, this was the first life seen upon earth. Because there's life in the plant cell. the same type of life that we understand, and it's not quite the same life that's seen within your barking dog, you know. But there's life within that plant cell. It grows, it reproduces, it consumes carbon dioxide through chloroform. It has it's just amazing. It is a first form of life. And so God, before this point, God was working with dumb rock, you know, and water that had no life to it. All of a sudden, now there's life. Here comes the plants. Mm-hmm. And not only, when you think about this, not only were the plants, the first kind of form of life, if you would, but they were given, ultimately, they would serve as food for the animals. And not only that, as we talked about a while ago, they give us oxygen. Yeah.
The plant life had to come before animal life, obviously.
Yes.
Because you had to have the food source there. Man is constantly trying to usurp the creation that we read about here in Genesis. And this may be part of evolution, but you can go to seed catalogs, Gurney's, Henry Field's, and all of these, and you see these fruit trees that will have 5 or 6 different varieties of fruit on there. Mm-hmm. You may have an apple tree that's growing 5 or 6 different kinds of apples, or you may have a peach tree that might also grow apricots and plums on it and everything. Well, most people understand this, I think, but there are a few people who might be gullible to not fully understand how can a tree do this, because God said everything was going to produce fruit according to its own kind. Mm. Well, man has gained enough technology and everything that what they do is they graft branches of different fruits onto this one trunk. And so as long as that tree lives and these different branches that have been grafted to it continues to grow, it will produce fruit of its own kind, because it always was an apple branch, it always will be an apple branch. But if you pick that apple off there, you're not going to get another tree that has fruit cocktail on it. You're going to get a tree that has exactly that same fruit.
Yeah. I remember an experiment when I was in Cool of Science fair experiment that you could do where you grafted a tomato plant to a potato plant.
Mm-hmm. They advertise that.
Up top you'd have tomatoes, and down below the roots you'd have potatoes. Yeah. But that's mankind manipulating what God allows him to manipulate. You think about that. What mankind in his great wisdom has figured out how to do, God lets him do. He created it so that it could be done in this fashion.
But then we have to do it like Dale's saying. We have to do it again if we want that again.
Yeah.
That multi-fruit plant doesn't pop off a seed and then a multi-fruit plant pops up again.
Yeah. It just supports the idea that God's creation was meant to be exactly how God created it. Evolution cannot possibly exist.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit later we'll talk about animal kind reproducing after its kind. And Dale, after I preached this sermon, Dale made a good point, one that I didn't realize, that mankind will try to merge a horse with a donkey.
Well,
and they get a mule, but the mule is sterile. Is that right?
That's exactly right. I mean, they want the work ethics of the donkey, but they want the size of the horse. Yeah. And invariably they create a mule. It doesn't matter whether it's a female mule or whether it's a male mule. They are always sterile. They cannot reproduce. And so just as John mentioned here, even with the fruit tree, if they want to duplicate that effort, they have to breed the horse to the donkey again to get another mule. And it's a perfect example where God does not allow man to usurp his creation. You don't see lions mating or mating with tigers. You don't see dogs mating with cats. They all reproduce after their own kind. They always will. Even if you put them in the wild, they will always reproduce after their own kind, because that's the way God intended it.
That's right. That's exactly right. The way that he created it.
I like what Paul said about that. He says it is still nothing new.
That's right. Correct. Yeah. That's exactly right.
And then Rosalito mentions no life without God, the Father of Christ.
That's right. We wouldn't. No life would be here without him.
Whenever he decides it's over, it's going to be over. No matter what man wants to do.
That's exactly right.
That'll be the end.
Despite what Harold Camping says. Which, by the way, that date has now been modified to October 21st.
Well,
Harold Camping said he missed it, or he miscalculated it.
Yeah, no. He always said that the earth would be destroyed on October 21st. What he said was that we would have the Judgment Day, rapture on May 21st.
But that didn't happen.
Then, well, here's his explanation on this now. May 21st would be the rapture, and then gradually over the next 6-month period of time, or what it was, October 21st, then the earth would be completely destroyed. So what he's saying now is that Christ did come and set his spiritual kingdom up on May 21st, but the earth will be destroyed October 21st. So now you need to mark your calendar for October 21st.
Like
and if there are any of you Herald Camping believers out there, please send me all of your assets. I'll take care of them as long as the earth is here.
All right. Back to our study of evolution.
No, creation.
Creation. But anyway, we need to go ahead and take our break. And on the other side of the break, we're going to be continuing with day number 4. One thing I want to make mention of, this next break that is about to come up is an advertisement of our upcoming gospel meeting. We have Dan Petty will be holding our summer gospel meeting, and it begins a week from this upcoming Monday. It's just right around the corner. So if you live in the Edmond, Oklahoma City area, we'd love for you to come and be our guest. All the information will be in the ad you'll see here in just a moment. But if you're not able to be in our area and attend personally, we will be live streaming the studies, the lessons, the worship services as well. So, all right, let's go ahead and take our next break. On the other side of the break, we're going to look at day number 4. Stay tuned. We will be right back. Summertime is quickly approaching. Many families have already started making plans for their summer vacation. Are you looking for something to do with your family this summer? Perhaps something that is wholesome and spiritually uplifting. If so, then I have a wonderful idea for you and your family. If you live in the Oklahoma City area, we would love for you and your family to be our guest during our 2011 summer gospel meeting. Dan Petty, a faithful gospel preacher from Temple Terrace, Florida, will be presenting the lessons. Our summer gospel meeting will begin Sunday, June 12th, and end Thursday, June 16th. If you will be traveling through our area, then please consider making plans to visit with us as well. As always, we will broadcast the gospel meeting live over the internet. For more information regarding our upcoming gospel meeting, see our website, www.seminolepoint.org. Let's go ahead and we were discussing some oddities of nature and some concoctions that people have tried to come up with from time to time as tourist attractions. And it's people try to modify what God has done, and they're not God, so it doesn't work. But let's go ahead and start with day number 4, Dale, if you would. Let's go ahead and read there in Genesis chapter 1. And if you would read from verses 14 down through 19, please.
No, I'll be glad to.
Okay.
Then God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth." And it was so. And in verse 16 says, "Then God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the 4th day."
All right, if you'll remember from 2 weeks ago when we first started this lesson, we made the point that when God created the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, we made the point that what you would have seen at that moment essentially was the rotation of the earth. Now, it was probably rotating from the very moment of its creation, but we see the evidence of the rotation process because you have a clarity, a difference between light and darkness. But with this right here, he now puts into the sky that we are into the space, if you would, that which would emanate the light that was already shining. And God can do that. I mean, we don't have the power to have a light without a light source. All right, but God can. He controls the light waves. He controls all the waves of the spectrum. And so on this day, we find that God created the sun and God created the moon. But not only that, John, he created the stars, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah, and when you look at this, it's no longer just the rotation of the Earth on its axis. That in part explains why the night sky changes, but it's also the orbit of the Earth around the sun. And as the Earth orbits around this newly created light, the stars' pattern in the sky change from day to day, rendering a measurable times and seasons. I mean, you can count the year off by one the rotation of the moon around the Earth, and as the sun marches across the sky, as the Earth spins on its axis and rotates around the Earth, it's amazing, and the precision of it. It is so precise that scientists, now that they understand it, can say, okay, I tell you what, 4,000 years ago, on this day, this nighttime, the stars would have looked like that. They say that based on the rules of lunar eclipse, following the whole pattern, that's how they're able to roughly place the time period of when Jesus was born. Because according to Josephus, just not too long before Herod's death, the one who tried to kill Jesus, there was a lunar eclipse. Josephus records that. So scientists can go back with how precise everything is and says that probably could have been this one or that one. Visible from that part of the Earth. I mean, it's just amazing. And it's all because of the precision that we have within the creation of the lights. The stars, the moon, the planets, the distant stars. It's just tremendous.
Right. And constant.
And constant.
Yeah. Continue to not only go back, but we can look forward and say exactly when that next one will be.
That's
down to
exactly
the second.
Right. That's right. It's neat.
Yeah.
Understatement.
But here's the problem why some people don't believe the first few chapters of the book of Genesis, is that they'll listen to all of our scientists and everything. The scientists say that it takes light years for light to come from the stars to get here to the face of the earth. What they fail to see, though, is that if God has the power, and He does, to create a star, to create a moon, to create a sun, He also has the power to have that light automatically from that star to Earth. Now, it may take light years for additional light to come from that star to the face of the Earth, but God has put it in place, in motion, to where it all is there, and that's why we can say the evening and the morning was the fourth day.
That's right. That's a very good point. I don't quite understand the difficulty. If someone believes that God has the power to create the universe, then surely He's got the power to create stars out there and the light already visible from Earth. Just like what you're talking about. I mean, He's got the power. John, any thoughts?
I agree. Yep. That goes into all the categories that we can talk about. Whether we talk about the caves that you go visit, that the stalactites are millions of years old.
Yeah.
Rather than a few thousand years. The same concept, they don't understand, or they refuse to believe or understand that God created it that way. He created it mature.
Yeah. Well, it's because of evolution, they and some scientific studies, but nothing factual, it's all theoretical, they're working off a given premise. And so everything is judged based on that given premise. And that's what creates the problems. Yeah. Couple things to note here as well when you look at 16 through 19, that in the greater light to rule the day, that's clearly our sun, the sun that we see in our day sky. The light that rules over the night is not an actual light source, it's the moon. But what is interesting, it has such a great reflective surface that when you have the night of a full moon and you've got the full amount of the moon that faces us reflecting the sun's light, you got enough light to go walking in the dark. I mean, it reflects the light from the sun, and so that's what we see there with that. Yeah. All right, any thoughts, Neil or John?
Speaking of the sun, and I'm not a scientist, so to speak, but hearing some preach who are scientists talking about the sun, they know that the sun is diminishing in size constantly. As it emits its energy and rays, it's diminishing and it's shrinking. And so if you put it at even, it wasn't a very long period of time, 100,000 years or so, even if, for instance, we might be that old, the sun would be so powerful and bright and intense that it would burn up everything that it hits on the earth.
That's what they say.
No, that's the scientists. They know that it would be so. If you go back past, if you go millions of years old, as the scientists say the earth is, but then you try to take the sun and you make it constant, like we're saying that they're trying to use the same premise for creation of stalactite. Well, it creates it at this constant rate based on this water flow and that much deposits. But then they throw that concept out the window when they see the sun diminishing in size at a certain rate. They don't want to hold that as a constant rate and say that, if it was 1 million years old, it would be, a couple thousand, miles from the earth and we'd all be burning up. They don't apply the same principle, across the board is what I'm saying.
Right. That's a good
They
thought.
pick and choose where they want to apply these principles that they come up with.
Well, and Luke makes a very good point in relation to this. They're working on the premise of a universe being without God.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore they have to explain everything under that guise, under that premise there. That's a good point there. Well, let's go ahead and step on into day number 5, Dale. Day number 5, let's see. Let's start there in our Bibles with verse 20, I think is where we've left off at. And let's see, John, I think it may be your turn to read for us 20 through 23.
Okay. Starting in verse 20, Then God said, Let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So God created great sea creatures, and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Verse 22 and 23, And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. So the evening and the morning were the 5th day.
What we have here, Dale, we now having the land come forth, and you got the seas and the land. And God having put vegetation on the land, He now decides to put animal life who would live in the firmament, and animal life that would live in the waters. And there was a lot of them.
That's true. Very true. But you have the vegetation that produces seed, and this seed provides food for the birds. Mm-hmm. Vegetation also provides food for the sea life and everything. If you look at seas, you have seaweed, you have moss growing in the seas, which is vegetation, and it provides food for the sea animals or creatures, as we sometimes say.
And in some cases, living space.
Yeah, sometimes, and they are very unique in this. Some of the sea creatures, turtles, alligators, which live in and out of water, lay eggs.
Right.
Fish, for the most part, lay eggs. But there are fish that are mammals that give birth to their young. The whale is a good example of that. So God has created everything to be unique within itself and to have a specific purpose.
That's right. That's right. And He put these here on this day. The birds for the air and the fish for the sea. Yeah.
Well, and if you look at what it exactly says, He says, let. In other words, God spoke and it was done.
That's right. Instantly. That's right. John?
Paul mentioned here that science that does not take into account God's revelation becomes God to its adherents. So the science which they preach and teach becomes their God.
That's true. That's true. Luke had put an interesting thing up in the chat room, just FYI information, about how big the sun is in relation to the earth. And it was up there for a moment, then it disappeared on my screen.
That's interesting. Yeah, it disappeared on mine too. Maybe he has the ability to retract it, and I didn't know it. But it was 330,000 times is what he had put there.
Bigger than the earth.
Either he needed to correct himself and took it off, or it just fell off. I noticed that too.
Well, maybe we have a fact-checking built in, and he was wrong. No. But now here's a very interesting point that really doesn't, it relates to us, but early in our study would have been a better point for it. But we are the perfect distance. Earth is a perfect distance from this ball of fire that we don't burn up, but we don't freeze either. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's perfect balance there with that. So,
ironically, the Earth is actually closer to the sun in the winter than it is in the summer, though. But it's because of the angle of the earth and everything that makes it a little bit cooler here upon the face of the earth.
That's interesting.
At least in our hemisphere.
That's right. In our hemisphere. One thing to note before we move on is God gave a very specific command to these animals. He told them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters and the seas. Let the birds multiply on the earth. So the evening and the morning were the fifth day. We will talk about this more in our lesson on the development of life. But he did not tell the fish, okay, you're going to swim in the waters and then at some point you're going to crawl out and become birds. You know, you have both birds and fish at the same time, same day of creation here, each multiplying after their own kind. Okay. All right, John, any thoughts?
Well, Kevin mentioned here he's heard scientists refer to Earth's distance from the sun as the habitable zone.
That's nice.
So, like you're saying, it's the perfect distance for where we need to be.
That's right.
If you get any closer, if you get down there to the Mercury or Venus, then you can't live, you can't survive. Even if it wasn't too hot, the radiation would be too much. Even with our atmosphere, probably if we got that close, the radiation would probably be too great.
Well, and our atmosphere is just, even without our atmosphere, we couldn't live, because of the radiation of the sun. And it serves a great job.
Yep.
Yeah. Luke gets into a little bit of deep detail there. I think is interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
He says, this is not the time place to discuss genetics/biochemistry. Luke is a pharmacist, by the way, so he's well educated. He says, but when you consider that really is. But when you consider the operation of DNA and how this molecule translates into a living organism, it is impossible not to have a creator. And that's right.
That's very true.
That's exactly right. It's just too complex. There has to be a creator with that. Okay.
And you talk about the fact that we can't possibly live on Venus and Mercury and all these other places. Man continues to try to find life upon these different planets. But a good example of how man has managed to live off of this Earth would be our space station. They've created a environment there, a terrarium within that space station. If they got outside that space station, they could not live. But as long as they stay inside that space station, they have the oxygen, they have the warmth, and all of the things that they need, only if the ship flies up there and provides additional provisions. Otherwise, they die.
Well, that's true.
But they wouldn't live up there long term. I mean, when you see those astronauts come back to Earth, they have to go through a lot of physical therapy and other things to get their muscle strength back to where it needs to be. And
well, that's something we've not even talked about, is the purpose of gravity that's generated by the size of the mass of the Earth. I mean, that's the whole benefit to that in and of itself.
Yeah. It's amazing, the little things you don't even think about.
That's right. It enables baseball. Because without it, you couldn't play.
With too much of it, you couldn't play.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, I was going to tell you about a comic strip that I saw, but we need to head on. Let's go ahead and take our last break for the evening. We come back from that break, we're going to look at day number 6. And we're getting into, finally, what God, I personally view it as what God has created all this for. We're getting up to that point, the subject of the purpose of the creation. So stay tuned. On the other side of the break, we'll look at day number 6. We will be right back. Hello there. I am John Duval. I am a member of and the preacher for the Seminole Point Church of Christ. Please allow me a few minutes of your time to share with you some information about the Seminole Point Church of Christ. The Seminole Point Church of Christ is under the oversight of 5 elders who guide the congregation in their service to God. These elders lead a very faithful group of people who love God and follow His Word. The elders of the Seminole Point Church of Christ have 6 deacons who tend to the cares and concerns not directly related to Bible teaching. The Seminole Point Church of Christ has Bible classes for all ages, which meet every Sunday morning at 9:30 and every Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock. Our Bible class teachers are dedicated to helping educate our children in the Word of the Lord and in the work of His church. On behalf of the members of the Seminole Point Church of Christ, I can tell you that our goal is heaven, and that we make every effort to ensure the Word of God is taught to every age group. It is our hope and prayer that you will take the opportunity to come be our guest and to learn more about us. You will find that we are a friendly and a loving congregation. Our place of worship is located at 16300 North May Avenue, Edmond, Oklahoma. Now, let us return to our study of the Scriptural way. Let's go ahead, gentlemen, and start now with day number 6. And let's start reading there. And we're going to break this up a little bit in our reading process. John, let's go ahead and start reading in verse 24. And let's read down through verse 27.
Okay. Verse 24, Then God said, Let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.
Okay. Read 27.
Okay. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them.
Okay. There's a lot of interesting things that we could talk about here, but for the sake of time, we're trying to narrow it down a little bit to some very important key points within this. But notice here, we started our reading there in verse 24, didn't we, John?
Yes, we did.
24. Okay. So here we have day 6. And now God is telling the land, He's putting creatures who will live upon the land. And He talks about cattle, creeping thing, and everything like that. But it's important to note that each was to reproduce after its own kind. Again, this is the same principle. We even see, pardon me, farmers understood this. People in the New Testament understood this. In Paul's letter to the church in Galatians, chapter 6 there, he makes the point that, he says, Be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that he'll also reap. Mm-hmm. And so it's a common principle there. And, pardon me, having a little bit of difficulty here. So when you give consideration to this, he's now brought animals onto the land there, and he's told them that they were to reproduce each after their kind. Jimmy, mute me for a minute. Go ahead, don't talk.
Well, exactly right. He talked about the fact that each animal is to produce after its own kind. And we talked about the fact that, well, what about dinosaurs,
Right.
Extinct animals? And there are animals today that we know that are virtually extinct. Mankind is constantly trying to save them by putting them in zoos and other places and,
Right.
and controlled breeding programs so that we don't lose these animals. And we can certainly do that, but the point is that animals will live according to the environment they're in. Man can destroy some of these environments, and as a result, animals will die off because they no longer have their territory, their area where they were originally placed. But they will always reproduce after their own kind,
Right.
and mankind cannot change that.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's the design, the Creator's design. Johnny, thoughts?
When you think about, just came to mind as I was thinking about the dinosaurs there and mankind affecting something most likely to cause their extinction,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be their living environment or whatever it might be. But you think about the large animals of the sea, and it's probably lucky for the whales and some of those animals that we don't have as much direct impact over what's underneath the sea.
Right.
Now we're having impacts in the oceans, but not quite as directly as we can affect going and cutting down trees.
Yeah.
And doing other things on the land, which we have a little bit easier reign of.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Let's focus our attention now to verse 26 for a moment here. Because we find here that God, now in turning to man, He says, Let us make man in our image. Now, He never says this about any other part of creation. Okay? He says, Let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Now, this has often been a subject of great discussion, and I remember as a kid, when children, they don't know any better, but you think God has 2 legs and 2 arms and a nose just like we do. And so here we have man who's a bipedal creation. Well, God must be a bipedal creature. He made man in his image. But he's not talking about physical image. Because when you look at the Scriptures, you find with certainty that God is spiritual. He's not physical. He wasn't physical when He created the heavens and the earth, and He's not physical now. He is spiritual. Therefore, it cannot be the physical image of God, for He has no physical image. So the only other thing is His image spiritually. John 4, verse 24 there, Jesus makes the point that God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. He is spirit. Even Jesus Himself, while He dwelt upon this earth, was and is immortal, dwelling within that spiritual realm. And so when you talk to people and study with them about this verse where it says, God made man in His image, make sure they understand it's the spiritual image of God. It is not the physical image of God. Any thoughts?
Man is the only creation that God created that has the ability to think, has the ability to cry, have feelings, because we are created in the image of God. We are the Spirit has been created, and the Spirit will live on forever. The flesh will die, just as animal flesh will die, but animal flesh has no spirit. Even though mankind likes to think that animal flesh has spirit, and they go to these great lengths to have cemeteries for our pets and all of this, the fact is that we're doing that for our own comfort. But the only creation that God created that has a spirit that will live forever is mankind.
That's exactly right. And that's one of the great separating differences between man and animal. Our bodies will return to flesh. Our spirit will return to God. That's simple.
Yeah. To dust.
What did I say?
To flesh.
Body will return to dust. That's
there we
right.
Go.
Yeah. And our spirit will go back to God there.
He used to believe that, but that was another life.
I notice we have a good comment in the chat room. We have just a few minutes remaining. Let's go ahead and bring that question into the study tonight, and then we'll do a brief summary of what Genesis 1 talks about, because we've covered the main portion of how life began. So go ahead and hit Dale with this question, John.
Oh, Rosalito says there's a question from the audience there. He says, when God created everything of the earth, did God create the snake? Satan is in quotations there.
Right.
If God did not create Satan, where did he come from? And then Luke mentions Satan took the form of a snake.
Yeah. This is an interesting part of the biblical story, or the biblical account of creation. I believe it's Peter that tells us, Peter or Jude, I need to go back and double check this, that essentially there were angels who rebelled against God, and they were cast down from the first estate. It's not the story of Lucifer. You'll have people go to Isaiah 14 or 16 that talks about the great fall of Lucifer and how God cast him down to the earth. Well, you look contextually there, that's talking about a king, not some demonic being. Okay, but Peter, I believe it is, and it could be Jude, tells us about angels that left their first estate, that they rebelled against God. Of those angels, of those spiritual beings, one of them came to be known as Satan or the devil. One of them led others, you might say, in rebellion. And their place is reserved in hell. I mean, that's where they will be eternally chained in the chains there. But apparently, according to what Genesis tells us, that Satan took the opportunity to take the form of a serpent. Now, I'm of the persuasion that God created snakes like He created all the other creeping animals, and it just so happened that Satan took that form to approach woman. Some people look at snakes and say, well, they actually came from Satan. They didn't. I don't believe that to be the case there.
Now, do you think they traveled differently before this, though? Because afterwards, he says, because of this thing you've done there in chapter 3, verse 14, you will be cursed more than all cattle and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go. Of the dust you shall eat. Of the dust all the days of your life. Do you think that was a change?
Could have been.
Most to the serpents?
Yeah.
Normal up to that point anyway?
Yeah. if God only created one species of snakes, then it very well could have had other modes of, it could have had legs and arms or something or another like that.
Right.
But yeah, or again, he could have been cursing that one particular one. That's an interesting point of that account there. But no, God did create Satan, or the devil, in that he was a spiritual being created by God. And he rebelled against. But he took the form of a serpent, took the form of an animal that God had already created. At least that's the way I see the story there.
And from what William points out, you were right either way you went with Jude or 2 Peter. So.
Both of them talk about it. 2 Peter chapter 2, isn't it?
Right.
And then Jude.
Jude, verse 6.
Jude, chapter 1, I think. See, the first to last chapter of Jude. I had to go back and look at that one.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, I want to extend my my appreciation to Rosalito. Rosalito's in the Philippines, and we have several people who listen regularly, join us for our study with Rosalito, and we really appreciate that. It means a lot to us, not only just us, but to everybody who participates in this study. Well, let's go ahead and Dale, do you have any thoughts about that before we go on?
Well, very briefly, I just want to make one statement about Satan. A good book to go to is the book of Job, because God has always been in control and will always be in control. He never allowed Satan to overstep his bounds when it came to Job. Satan was not able to kill Job. He was not able to take his spirit or anything like that. God did allow him to inflict physical harm, to take all of his assets, his family, and all of that, to prove that Job was a faithful individual. The scriptures tell us that God will never allow us to be tempted greater than what we can absorb or what we can handle.
Right.
God will always have control over Satan.
Exactly. And Satan will pay the eternal price.
Absolutely.
For what he has done there. And William makes a good point in touching base with what Paul says, Paul Adams, that is. He makes the point that I'm not sure we can tie angels who sin scripturally to the identity of Satan. It may be one of the things that fall under Deuteronomy 29:29, the secret things of God and so forth. And then William says, I agree, Paul, I don't think either Peter or Jude are speaking specifically about Satan. We do not know exactly what happened with Satan, but we do know their angels did sin, and they were cast down from the first estate. May or may not be a direct connection there. But in either case, though, the Satan didn't become the serpent. God created snakes like all the other creation. Just apparently there is an alteration of the mobility, possibly, of the serpent, based on Satan's use of him. Possibly, so. Alrighty, well, let's go ahead and pull the study to a close with a brief conclusion. I've often found the Genesis account very interesting, because when you look at the Genesis account, you'll see that on day 1, God made light, and then on day 4, he made the sun, moon, and stars that emits the light. Day 2, he created the firmament, or the atmosphere. And that atmosphere separated the waters from above from the waters below. Well, on day 5, kind of imagine 2 charts here. On day 5, he created the birds and the fish. Birds would fly in the atmosphere, and the fish would swim in the water below the atmosphere. And then on day 3, he brought forth the dry land, and on day 6, he put land animals and man on that dry land. So it's an interesting explanation of sorts to help us understand how the creation process took place, and kind of the simplicity in the overall comprehension of what God did. So we asked the question, how did life begin? As we said at the beginning of the study, the answer to this question is truly a matter of faith, because I can't go back in time and prove it. Dale can't go back in time and prove it. You cannot go back in time and prove how it began. No scientist can go back and show how life began. So we have to consider what's going to be the basis of our faith, of our evidence. Many people look at science as being the sole source. The theories of man, they put their faith in that. We put our faith in the Bible. And therefore, if the Bible says it, that settles it.
Well, that's exactly right. God said it, that settles it. It doesn't matter whether we believe it or not. We pray that everyone does believe it, But the fact is, there are a number of people who don't believe it, even though God said it.
That's right. This is exactly right. They've chosen by faith. They've chosen to put their faith elsewhere, I should say. John, any thoughts?
I agree. Yep.
What we'll do next Tuesday morning, next Tuesday evening, Lord willing, is we're going to look at the second lesson in this look at creation and evolution. And we're going to look at the subject of evolution, or more to the point, the development of life on this earth. And we'll show some interesting theories that man has put forth about how life actually developed once it began on this earth. But more importantly, we'll look at what the Bible has to say regarding how life developed upon this earth. Remember, our gospel meeting starts in less than 2 weeks. Mark your calendars, June 12th. It'll run June 12th through the 16th. We will live stream all the services. On Sunday night through Thursday night, we'll meet at 7 o'clock for a 30-minute period of song service. So if you'd like to join us for that via the internet, you can do that. We will be putting the songs up on the charts now, up on the screen. A little new piece of technology we're able to do. And so those at home, you can now sing along. If you didn't know the song before, you now can follow along with the song. So,
and I might mention our good preacher, John Duval, will be the song leader.
I will be leading the singing that week. That's right. But more importantly, everybody else will be joining me in singing.
We hope so.
Yeah, no soloists here. Dale, any thoughts before we close?
No, sir. I appreciate everybody, and especially the comments. We learned something tonight, that you can post comments on there, and then you can retract them if you don't feel that they need to be presented. But we found all the comments very interesting, and without you, this would not be a very successful class.
I wish I could do that during my sermons. Retract certain comments.
Well, it's always good that you tell everybody to look at the screen and don't pay attention to you on certain things.
That's my standard rule. When in doubt, follow the chart. John, any thoughts?
I agree with Dale. Thanks for everybody participating and all the good comments we had.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us, and continue to seek the Word of God. Seek the Scriptural way in all things, and let the Bible be your final answer in your life as a Christian. Join us again next Tuesday night at 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time right here at scripturalway.org.